Here's a puzzle most Bible readers miss entirely. In Luke chapter 4, the people of Nazareth say to Jesus, "Do here what you did in Capernaum." But there's a problem. In Luke's gospel, Jesus hasn't been to Capernaum yet. It's like someone saying, "Remember that party last week?" about a party that hasn't happened. This isn't a mistake. It's a clue that Luke is doing something deliberate, rearranging his source material to make a theological point. Once you see it, you'll never read Luke the same way again. Let's examine the evidence. In Mark's Gospel, the Nazareth rejection appears in chapter 6, well into Jesus' ministry. He's already been healing in Capernaum for months. Matthew follows the same order, but Luke moves this entire scene to chapter 4, Jesus' very first public act after his baptism and temptation. The Capernaum reference makes perfect sense in Mark's timeline. In Luke's timeline, it creates a chronological impossibility. This proves something crucial. Luke knew Mark's version. He consciously chose to relocate this story. He even preserved the Capernaum detail despite the chronological problem it creates. Ancient authors weren't careless editors. They were sophisticated writers making deliberate choices. The question becomes, why would Luke do this? The answer lies in a technique called programmatic placement. Ancient writers often positioned thematically important material at the very beginning of their works. Luke transforms a brief rejection scene into an extended sermon packed with theological content. Think of it like an overture in an opera, introducing all the major themes before the story unfolds. The Nazareth sermon introduces 3 themes that will dominate Luke Acts. First, the acceptable year of the Lord, divine timing. Second, the Elijah and the Elisha examples, the Gentile mission. Third, the murderous rejection, the persecution pattern. Each theme appears here first, then echoes throughout both volumes. Jesus reads from Isaiah 61 about liberation and restoration. Then he makes a stunning declaration, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." This establishes divine timing. A special moment in history has arrived. The word "today" carries enormous weight in Luke's gospel. Later, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem, saying, "You did not recognize the time of your visitation." The people had a window of opportunity. They missed it. And this theme of divine timing, of recognizing God's moment, runs through everything Luke writes. Then Jesus makes 2 provocative comparisons that change everything. He says, during a famine in Israel, many widows suffered, but God sent Elijah not to any of them. He sent him to a Gentile widow in Sidon. And during Elisha's time, many lepers lived in Israel, but the prophet healed none of them. Instead, he healed Naaman, a Syrian military commander, an enemy of Israel. These aren't random sermon illustrations. They're a theological bombshell. Jesus is saying God's prophets have always gone beyond Israel when Israel rejects them. The crowd understands exactly what he's implying, and they're furious. The congregation's rage escalates to attempted murder. They drag Jesus to a cliff outside the city to throw him off. At the very start of his ministry, his own people try to kill him for suggesting God's blessing might extend to Gentiles. This violent rejection foreshadows the crucifixion at the end of Luke. It foreshadows Stephen's stoning in Acts. It foreshadows Paul's beatings in city after city. The pattern of rejection begins here. Here's where it gets fascinating. Watch what happens repeatedly throughout Acts. Paul enters a city. He goes to the synagogue. He preaches to Jews first. Some believe, but the leaders reject the message. Paul declares he's turning to the Gentiles. The gospel spreads to new populations. This pattern appears in Pisidian Antioch, where Paul says we turn to the Gentiles. It appears in Corinth, where Paul shakes out his garments and goes to the Gentiles. It appears in Ephesus, and finally in Rome, where Acts ends with Paul quoting Isaiah about deaf ears and blind eyes. Luke has shown us the template in chapter 4. The Nazareth sermon establishes a cycle that repeats throughout Acts. Stage 1, the gospel is proclaimed to Jews. Stage 2, some believe, but leaders reject. Stage 3, the turn to Gentiles is announced. Stage 4, The gospel spreads to new populations, then the cycle begins again in a new location. This isn't random. It's the Nazareth template playing out across the Roman world. Some readers think Luke made a chronological error with the Capernaum reference. He didn't. The slip proves he knew his source and chose to rearrange it. Others think the Nazareth rejection is just biographical detail about Jesus' hometown. It's not. Luke expands a brief scene into a full theological sermon. Still others think Jesus' references to Gentiles were random illustrations. The crowd's murderous rage proves otherwise. They understood exactly what Jesus was claiming about who would receive God's blessing. The Nazareth sermon isn't just about one rejection in one town. It's Luke's thesis statement for a 2-volume work. Understanding this transforms how we read both Luke and Acts. Every rejection, every turn to Gentiles, every persecution echoes back to this opening scene. Luke placed it first because it explains everything that follows. The programmatic opening reveals the pattern of the entire narrative.